22nd, 1914, near Charleroi, Belgium. The sun rose over a misty landscape painted with dew, the fields trembling under the rumble of distant guns. A column of French infantry advanced through the morning haze, their bright red trousers and blue tunics blazing like banners of another century. Captain Henri Dubois rode alongside his men, the reins of his chestnut horse clutched tight, the air already thick with the smell of sweat and gun oil. He could see the line of troops ahead, the 153rd Infantry Regiment, stretching into the distance, each man burdened with a full pack, a Lebel rifle slung over his shoulder, and a faith in the tricolor flag that fluttered from their ranks. They marched as if on parade. The brass buttons gleamed in the morning light. The officers' sabers caught the sun. From a distance, it might have looked magnificent, a tide of French valor rolling northward to meet the Germans. But then came the sound. The slow, deliberate tapping of German machine guns, the devil's typewriters, the men called them, and soon that rhythmic chatter began to rip through the air. Dubois pulled hard on his reins. "Down! Down into the ditch!" he shouted, but his words vanished under the roar. The men hesitated. They had been trained to advance, to hold the line, to maintain formation. They were soldiers of France, heirs of Napoleon's Grande Armée, not skulkers in mud. Private Marcel Lefebvre, 22 years old, a farmhand from Dijon, saw the first burst of bullets strike the column ahead. He froze. The man in front of him folded backward, his red trousers turning black as the blood soaked through. Lefebvre's mind screamed at him to run, but his boots felt glued to the earth. The machine guns kept singing. A whistle blew, and still the order came down the line, "En avant, forward." Dubois could hardly believe what he was seeing. His men, faces pale but determined, stepping over bodies and into the open fields. The red trousers that had once symbolized honor were now perfect targets, bright flags for German gunners to aim at. From the ridge beyond the wheat field, the Germans watched the French line approach through their sights. Sergeant Ernst Müller, manning an MG-08, muttered under his breath, "Rote Hasen, easy to see." Then he pressed the trigger. The chatter of the machine gun drowned out everything. Bullets sliced through stalks of wheat. Men fell, dozens at a time. The sound of their rifles, single, lonely cracks, was swallowed by the mechanized storm. Dubois dismounted, crouching beside a stone wall. "Medic! Medic!" he shouted, though he already knew few could help. He peered over the wall and saw the remnants of his company crawling forward, crawling because standing meant death. And yet, even as they fell, the line tried to hold its shape. Even as shells burst among them, they raised the regimental colors high, the tricolor fluttering defiantly amid the smoke. To an observer from afar, it might have looked like courage. To those inside it, it was madness. Dubois felt something hot graze his cheek, a splinter of stone or a bullet that came too close. He turned to the lieutenant beside him. "This is slaughter. They're sending us to die for trousers," Dubois muttered. The lieutenant didn't answer. He was staring at the field, at the rows of red and blue strewn like fallen flags. By noon the sun was high, and the French advance was broken. The officers called for retreat, but few were left to hear the order. The wounded cried for water. The air reeked of cordite and blood. As night fell, Dubois and the survivors dragged themselves back through the fields, stepping carefully among the dead, men whose uniforms still glowed faintly in the moonlight, as if mocking the very idea of glory. The red trousers, les pantalons rouges, had been a matter of pride, a symbol of France's martial spirit, but now, to every man who had survived that day, they were the color of death.
Paris, early September 1914. The cafes along the Boulevard Saint-Germain were full of talk, not of the dead, but of glory. Newspapers on every corner still printed patriotic sketches of soldiers in brilliant red trousers, bayonet shining, chasing the gray-clad Germans from French soil. The truth from the front, the staggering losses, the slaughter in the fields, was spoken only in whispers. In the Ministry of War, the debate over the uniform was reaching a fever pitch. Inside a grand chamber lined with portraits of marshals past, General Joseph Joffre stood before the gathered officers and deputies. His voice was calm, almost paternal, as he addressed the room. "The pantalon rouge, gentlemen, is France itself. It is the mark of our courage, the red of our flag, the blood of our fathers who defended the Republic." Across the table, a civilian minister cleared his throat. "With respect, General, the men are dying. They're too visible on the field. The Germans can spot them a mile away." A murmur swept through the room. Some officers looked down, uncomfortable. Others scoffed. Colonel Deleuze, an old cavalryman with a waxed mustache and iron posture, slammed his fist on the table. "A Frenchman does not hide. The Germans wear gray like ghosts, sneaking, crawling. We wear red because we stand proud. Would you have us crawl in the dirt like them?" But the younger officers, many fresh from the front, said nothing. They had seen what those red trousers meant now. They had seen men mowed down before they even reached the enemy line. In the corner, Captain Dubois, recently returned from Charleroi, his left arm bound in a sling, waited for his turn to speak. When he finally rose, the room went still. "General, with all respect, the red trousers make fine targets. I've buried 50 men in 3 days. They didn't die for France. They died because the enemy could see them coming." The silence hung heavy. Joffre frowned. "Captain, the spirit of the army depends on its symbols. Change too much, and you risk breaking that spirit." Dubois met his gaze. "Sir, their spirit is already broken, by bullets, not by doubt." No one answered him. The debate would rage for weeks more. Meanwhile, at the front, the French army bled across Belgium and eastern France. The machine guns tore apart regiment after regiment, at Rossignol, Morhange, the Ardennes. On some battlefields, so many men fell that the red of their trousers mixed with the mud, staining the ground itself. Letters from the front began to seep into the public. A sergeant from the 45th wrote, "They call us the beautiful army, but the Germans see us before we see them. Their guns find us before we reach the trees. We march in red, we die in red." Still, the War Office insisted. The bright uniforms were tradition. They inspired confidence. They connected the army to the victories of 1870, even though 1870 had ended in defeat. In the cafes, artists and patriots argued passionately. A famous journalist declared, "Remove the red trousers and you strike at the heart of France's honor." But as the casualty lists grew longer, honor began to mean less than survival. Wives received telegrams edged in black. Mothers wept over photographs of sons they could no longer recognize. Back at the front, Dubois' regiment received replacements, boys barely out of school, their new uniforms stiff and spotless. He watched them button their bright tunics, the same as before, and felt his stomach tighten. "Do they know?" he asked his sergeant. The sergeant shook his head. "They'll know soon enough." When the whistle blew again and they went forward, the red line moved once more into the open, a living target beneath the gray sky. By the end of the year, France would lose more than 300,000 men, and finally, the truth became impossible to ignore. The red had to go. December 1914, a bitter wind swept across the fields of Champagne, carrying the scent of cordite and rot. The trenches had turned the land into a scarred labyrinth of mud, barbed wire, and shattered trees. Captain Dubois crouched in the cold muck, his once bright uniform now dulled by grime. His red trousers were patched, torn, and darkened to the color of dried blood, a mercy, perhaps, since bright red no longer had a place here. The front had gone still. Not quiet, never quiet, but still enough that a man could hear his own breath between the distant cracks of rifles. In that stillness, soldiers whispered about rumors trickling down from headquarters. A new uniform, a new color, something called horizon blue. The name sounded strange, almost poetic, like the sky they no longer saw. One morning, an orderly arrived at the dugout carrying a bundle wrapped in coarse paper. Dubois opened it and stared. The fabric inside was unlike anything he'd seen, a muted grayish blue, soft but sturdy. The color reminded him of dawn over the Marne. Not quite blue, not quite gray, the color of distance and uncertainty. "This is it?" his sergeant asked, squinting. "Doesn't look like much." Dubois nodded slowly. "No, but maybe that's the point." Across the front, the French army began to shed its old skin. The famous red trousers, once a badge of honor, were quietly withdrawn from supply depots. The pantalon rouge, centuries of tradition, was being replaced by practicality. The new horizon blue uniforms were born from necessity, a blend of wool, indigo dye, and the pale white of unbleached cloth. The order came from the top. Joffre himself had signed the change after relentless pressure from field commanders and public outrage. It had taken thousands of dead and the near collapse of entire divisions for France to accept that modern war cared nothing for glory, only for survival. Dubois watched his men dress in the new uniforms. They looked almost ghostly in the early morning fog, a ghost army for a ghost war. When they moved, the gray-blue fabric blended with the sky, with the mud, with the smoke. It was harder now to tell where one man ended and the earth began. And that, Dubois thought, was exactly what they needed. When the Germans attacked again near Soissons, the difference was immediate. The enemy's gunners had a harder time finding targets. The French lines didn't blaze red against the fields anymore. They faded into the haze, indistinct and patient. The machine guns still reaped their toll, but now the French could shoot back. In Paris, the newspapers finally acknowledged the change. An editorial in Le Matin wrote, "The red trousers have died with our illusions. The horizon blue belongs to the new France, one that has looked into the abyss and still stands." But not everyone was ready to let go. Old generals, those who had built their careers on spectacle and parade ground splendor, grumbled in their salons. "This war," one complained, "is stripping us of our soul." Dubois, hearing of this through a letter from home, laughed bitterly. "Our soul," he said to his men, "we've seen what their soul looks like. It bleeds red in the mud." That winter, snow fell over the trenches. The horizon blue uniforms blended perfectly with the frost and fog. From above, an observer in a reconnaissance balloon wrote in his logbook that the French lines were almost invisible, a seamless part of the landscape. Invisible. That word, once an insult, had become a blessing. The men no longer marched in columns across open fields. They crept, crawled, dug. The war had changed them, turned them from soldiers of pageantry to soldiers of endurance. And as they stood in their blue-gray coats, rifles slung, faces hardened by smoke and frost, there was no longer any illusion of glory. The red trousers were gone. The horizon blue had come, not as a symbol of pride, but of understanding. That war was not about color or display. It was about survival in a world that had forgotten chivalry and found the machine gun instead. Dubois lit a cigarette, watching the pale smoke curl upward into the color of his uniform, into the color of the sky itself. He thought of the men who'd fallen in red and of those still living in blue. The war wasn't over, not even close, but at least now France had stopped marching to its death in bright colors. Now, at last, it could fight.